All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving deep into a pathogen that, honestly, every microbiologist needs to be ready for, Francisella tularensis.
Let's just get right to the most critical point, shall we? This organism is a true master of disguise, and in the lab, a single mistake, one tiny misstep, well, it can lead to a lab-acquired infection with some really serious consequences.
Okay, so just so you know where all this is coming from, this entire technical review was compiled using a Gemini deep search. And hey, if you want to geek out on the original papers, all the sources are right there for you in the accompanying notebook document.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at why this is a Tier 1 agent, then get into what the infection actually looks like, the clinical side. After that, it's all about the lab clues, treatment options, a weird little gap in testing standards, and we'll wrap up with the absolute bottom line, biosafety.
All right, first up, let's really get a handle on the profile of this thing.
So right off the bat, what you have to know is that this is a Tier 1 select agent. Now, what does that mean? It means it's in the big leagues of dangerous pathogens, right up there with the agents that cause anthrax and plague. We're talking about a bug that's considered a severe threat to public health. It's not something to be taken lightly, at all.
And here's why it gets that Tier 1 label. It is incredibly infectious. I mean, look at this number. Just 10 little organisms inhaled as an aerosol can be enough to cause disease. Think about that. 10 colony-forming units. That's a microscopic, completely invisible puff of air. It's why this is so dangerous in a lab setting.
Now, it's not all one and the same. There's a really stark difference in virulence depending on the subspecies. You've got subspecies tularensis, or type A, which you'll find in North America. That one is highly virulent with high mortality. Then, across the northern hemisphere, including Europe, you've got subspecies Holartratia, or type B. It's less virulent, rarely fatal, but still, you don't want to mess with it. The others, well, their role in human disease isn't as well understood.
Okay, so that's the bug. Now let's look at the disease it causes, tularemia. Understanding how it shows up in patients really drives home why getting that lab ID right and fast is so critical.
And boy, does it have a lot of different faces. I mean, look at this. The way it presents totally depends on how a person gets infected. You can have the classic ulceroglandular form, that's the most common, with a skin ulcer and swollen lymph nodes. But it can also cause everything from conjunctivitis to a nasty pharyngitis. The ones to really watch out for, Pneumonic, which is the most severe, and the typhoidal form. That typhoidal one is super tricky because it's just a fever and systemic illness with no obvious source, which puts all the pressure right back on the lab.
Which brings us right to the crime scene, your bench. So you get a sample. What are the telltale signs? What clues are you looking for?
Okay, gram stain. This is your first potential pitfall. We're talking about tiny, pleomorphic, gram-negative coccobacilli, and they stain so faintly with the standard safranin that you could easily mistake them for background junk or just miss them entirely. Seriously. That's why it's a really good idea to use a basic fusion counterstain. It just makes them pop a little more. And don't rely on seeing bipolar staining. That's not a reliable feature here.
All right, now for the culture plate. You see this growth on chocolate agar, but nothing on mac and conky. What's the first thing that jumps into your head? For 99% of us, it's Haemophilus, right? It's almost a reflex. And that reflex, that assumption, is exactly where the danger is. It's a trap. But it's a trap you can avoid. This is the great mimicry. But there are key differences. Look, Francisella tularensis needs cysteine to grow, not X and V factors like Haemophilus. It won't show any satellite phenomenon. And here's the big one, the one that should set off alarm bells. It's oxidized negative. Haemophilus is usually positive. That one simple test could be the thing that prevents a catastrophic misidentification. Oh, and it's a slow grower too. You'll be waiting a couple of days.
So, let's say you've nailed the ID. You've unmasked the mimic. Now what? How do we fight it? Well, understanding its built-in defenses is absolutely critical for treatment. And here's its main party trick, intrinsic beta-lactam resistance. So, all those penicillins and cephalosporins that are often used first, they're not going to work. Why? Because this organism naturally produces its own little weapon, a beta-lactamase, called FTU1. It just chews up those antibiotics. This is a crucial piece of intel for the clinical team.
So if beta-lactams are out, what's in? Well, if you look at the guidelines, whether it's the Dutch RIVM or the international CDC, they're pretty much on the same page. For severe disease, the go-to is an aminoglycoside, like gentamicin. And then for a step down to an oral drug, or for less severe cases, you're looking at doxycycline or a fluoroquinolone, like ciprofloxacin. Pretty straightforward, really.
And what about for kids? Well, the same principles apply, you just adjust the dosing for body weight. Gentamicin, still preferred for severe cases, but what's really interesting here is the recommendation for doxycycline. For years there was this big hesitation to use doxy in kids under 8 because of concerns about teeth staining. But for a serious infection like tularemia, major bodies like the American Academy of Pediatrics say, go ahead. The benefit of using a highly effective drug absolutely outweighs the small risk.
Okay, this brings us to susceptibility testing. And this is where things get, well, a little weird, especially if you're working in a European lab.
So, imagine you're in a European lab. You've isolated this thing, and you want to run an AST. The very first question you're going to ask is, what are the EUCAS breakpoints for Francisella tularensis, right? You need them to know if your bug is susceptible or resistant. And the answer is, there aren't any. Nope, none. It's kind of shocking, right? For a Tier 1 select agent, EUCAS, the European authority, has no published breakpoints. This is a massive gap. It leaves European labs in a really tough spot without official guidance.
So what does everyone do? They turn to the CLSI guidelines from the United States. These have become the de facto global standard. So if you're in Europe, or anywhere else for that matter, and you're doing susceptibility testing on this organism, these are the breakpoints you have to use. It's the only standard we've got. All of this, the high infectivity, the mimicry, the gaps in guidance, it all leads to one single most important topic: biosafety. How do you handle this thing without getting yourself or your colleagues sick?
Okay, let's break it down. When you're just processing the initial clinical specimen, say blood or a tissue sample, before culture, you can do that at biosafety level 2. But, and this is a huge but, it has to be done inside a Class 2 biological safety cabinet. No open bench work, period. The second you have growth on a plate, the very instant you suspect you have a culture of Francisella tularensis, everything changes. The game is over for BSL-2. All work, and I mean all activities with a culture, must be done under full BSL-3 containment. There are absolutely no exceptions. This isn't a suggestion, it's a non-negotiable rule.
So, what happens if the worst-case scenario plays out? A splash, a dropped plate, some kind of high-risk exposure in the lab. There's a plan for that, too. It's called post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP. The protocol is to immediately start a 14-day course of either doxycycline or ciprofloxacin to stop an infection from ever taking hold.
And that really brings us to the final critical question. You know the risks, you know the subtle clues and the ways it can trick you. So how does your lab's protocol make absolutely sure that this dangerous mimic is never ever mistaken for a common bug? Because at the end of the day, safety and accuracy all come down to one thing: a sharp microbiologist who knows what to look for. We'd really love to hear from you on this one. Have you ever encountered this organism? What are your lab's protocols? Share your experiences and any questions you have down in the comments. And of course, if you found this explainer useful, please subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this. Thanks for watching.